We have another architecture design panel for you, but this one actually focuses on urban data and design. So this is going to get into a little bit of kind of the IoT space, this kind of data collection, mass data, all of that. So hopefully you stick around. So our cities and buildings generate flourishing, unseen environments. They're beautiful reflections of our daily lives in the spaces we occupy. In this panel, we're going to discuss the vehicles for immersive data and how they interplay with the built environment. And I am Kachina Studer. I am a VR, AR, UX strategist and product development lead at ArrowStreet. We have with us Honghao Deng, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, the creative director for Radical Department, Tyler Shannon, a data scientist, architect, and urban strategist at ArrowStreet, and Vivian Wu, an architectural designer and AR visionary at ArrowStreet as well. So I will jump into the first question. How do you see IoT and public data beginning to augment our lives?
I think it's already happening. Like, think about this. If I want to go to a movie right now, I'm probably going to check like my browser, like saying them the showtime, and then like basically the nearest theater will pops up, and then like the relative movies will show up also based on my search histories. And then I might check like the movies for IMDb score to decide, and then I might check also for the location of the nearest theater on Waze or Google Maps to see whether I'm going to be able to be there on time. Well, like this is a really linear and repetitive process of like using the data to make a decision. But like, what if we have this like comprehensive augmented reality layer that is like geologically mapped on the physical world with the data visualization? I believe our decision making can be way more fast, more natural. For example, if I want to decide to go to a movie, I probably just look outside, and the movie theater will be all highlighted. And then like, well, I also got a little bit sense of the feeling whether the movie theater is like crowded or not, whether the road to there is like full of traffic. And then if I gaze at those theaters, I might be able to listen to the comments of people talk about whether the environment is good or whether it's good for a certain movie. So like, with this comprehensive layer on top of using, visualize all the data around, people will be able to just going out without checking all their checking on their phone or their browser before. They will just look outside. Okay, that place seems very nice to go for a movie. I will just go there right now.
I think taking a step back, our buildings have actually been augmenting the human experience for millennia. And now our digital technologies are playing a much bigger role in that human experience. And they're changing much more quickly than our building technologies are. And we like to say that technology is fast, buildings are slow. And so I think as our society uses more and more technology, collects more and more data, as architects, we can start to harness that data to make more informed decisions about our buildings and cities. And so I think with this new technology comes an opportunity to rethink and sort of tweak the building technology that goes along with that.
Yeah, I think data is changing our life mainly through, especially the built environment through the augmented reality devices. And these AR devices are enhancing our lives in a way that they can make our built environment more informational, and it can let us as architectural designer to rethink the split between the two-dimensional internet interface and the physical environment. So I think the opportunity would be how can we as designers to represent this data three-dimensionally in our space.
So there are a few examples out there currently of ways we're augmenting our current environments with the mass data that's out there. So this data unification, basically all the data that comes from every source that is public domain, private domain, and creating applications out of it. How is this providing us ubiquitous connectivity, and is that a positive thing? Is that a negative thing? Does it help us or does it hinder us?
Well, before I answer this question, I think like sometimes people do prefer like their environment to be very static and then not like dynamic changing. Well, to answer the question, I think like there's already a lot of data unification data out there. But from the user's perspective, like data connectivity means that like they need to see the data, and also they need to make use of the data. Well, like please allow me to continue the imagination having this geological mapped augmented reality data of data visualization of our physical world. So like, if you're not a tourist, and then if you don't check your web browser or do any like background research before you go outside, you see the urban surrounding. You feel like it's kind of dry and there's no activity going on. But the truth is not like that. But if you have all this data happening around you, like visualize and map correctly of your surroundings, for example, as a foodie, when you go outside, you'll be directly seeing at one spot and feeling like, okay, that place looks very delicious. I'm going to go there for lunch. And then without checking any like Yelp or any like platform based on using ratings. Well, if you are a party cat, then you just go outside and can feel like, okay, my friends are there and my friend are there. And then there's an interesting party going on right there. And then without checking any of the Facebook pages or event pages. Well, I think this type of technology integration of data actually empower people to make decisions more naturally and more smoothly and help people live better and easier rather than becoming a slave to the technology.
I think unified data is, it's going to lead to connected cities, and I think that's a conversation that we're seeing at AeroStreet become more and more sort of at the forefront, especially as we think about autonomous vehicles. And I think that comes from, it's an interplay between both the private and the public sectors. They have to work together to come up with policy and safe ways of sharing this data to make sure our cities can make use of it in a well-maintained and intentional way.
I think add on to that, I think also data scientists and designer should collaborate with each other to produce more understandable and easy to use tool for the inhabitants in the space, because we shouldn't just give the users the raw data. They should be articulated and then interpreted by design decisions. I think that's the key as using those data.
So all of this data collection, this is from public domain in almost every circumstance from some point of view, whether it's an application you're using on your phone, it's the public that's giving this data to companies, to public data platforms. And there are a lot of issues with the proprietary aspects of that and who has ownership over that data. And even if this data is anonymous, like it's a source that we're getting from like the bike shares or other public transportation kind of anonymous source data that's just collected, how is this aggregate data effective for open source projects? And should the applications and solutions that are coming out of like open source public data, should they ever become fully proprietary, or should there be an output from those applications that is still open source?
This is a very tricky question. I wish I don't need to answer this, but like, I think we need to look at this question in a long run. Like, for example, if you think about like the urban environment, in our cities, 20 years later, I think a lot of things will be way more automated. But where does this automation come from? It has to be filled by all this data collected. So there's definitely a lot of security and also privacy issues, even in like our smart home domain. Like a lot of time when you're trying to do like home automation for our client, the first thing your client is going to ask is that, like, especially I got a lot of this kind of questions, like, are you going to plant a camera in my bathroom? So, like, but we're definitely going to not going to do that. But we do need like sensor collection, sensor data collection to give you a no frustration like automation in every corner of the room. For now, we use PIR sensors. Well, I think like maybe the decentralized technology will help us a lot on the privacy and also security issue on this. But also on the logic side, I think users should be the owner of their own data. And then rather, when users are trying to use certain services that is going to utilize other people's shared data, then I think the ticket to it shouldn't be just by paying a fee. It should be the user's consent to share their own data.
I think it's important when addressing this question to make sure we actually know what public data is. What does public data mean? And essentially, it's any information that's in the public realm. And that could be generated by any number of people, governments, but there's a subset of public data called open data that is actually defined as being well-maintained, structured, and I think most importantly, easily accessible. Because not all public data is easily accessible. And going along with that, whenever you're looking to use public data in any type of product or solution, you need to be thinking about who collected it, how it was collected. Any data is going to have a bias based on who collected it. And I think it's important to be aware of that. So I think if you're looking to use public data as a way of developing a product or solution, it should really only be used as a benchmark for testing your initial products. And then your solution should have some type of mechanism to collect new, more relevant information that will later inform further developments of your product.
Yeah, I agree with Tyler. I think we as designers have the responsibility to interpret the data for the users and then transform it into something that is more representational and informational rather than just exposing all the datas, like the privacies, to all the users. I think also I'm thinking probably in the future the definition of privacy will change. So we'll see then.
So I know a number of you have had projects that kind of relate to this next question, so feel free to talk about those a little bit as well. We basically are going to see AR popping up everywhere because we're going to have devices that show us that. And it's kind of interesting who owns that domain, who doesn't own that domain, what applications are you running at one time, are you using a singular application that shows you an augmented world? But I wanted to ask you a question that was asked similarly in the last panel. Will immersive data and interactive layers interplay with the built space in architecture, or are cities going to become hosts to our content?
I think, like I said in the last panel, like if the materiality and also the tectonic of architecture that remain unchanged and doesn't evolve, there will definitely be two extremes that one, like it certainly become at the end a white box. Like they are all like they are holding activities today. They will be holding dynamic, transformative, augmented reality contents in the future because it's more efficient. On the other hand, it might be another reality that like architecture itself become more pure and more focused on art and become like more rich on spatial experience. And it's like augmented reality's job to find the function inside to provide all the program and the functionality. But just like what elevator did to the skyscraper, they actually helped each other to, technology always help the form of building to evolve, and the form of building also drive the technology to evolve. It's very likely that the form and also the materiality, the tectonic of architecture in the future will evolve. And we're going to showcase a little bit of it at the end of today's presentation, which is using this new medium of architectural technologies, using vapor to create augmentation of weather, of the richness of our nature inside architecture.
I don't think it's an either or. I think it's probably both will happen. But I don't think that architecture should be a white box that plays host to digital technologies. I think that we want to make sure that whatever the architecture we're designing remains accessible, and whatever digital technologies we embed in that architecture remain accessible. And so if an architecture becomes reliant upon a device, a handheld device, headset, whatever, we need to make sure that that is something that everyone can experience, because I mean, as architectural professionals, we want to make sure that we're designing for the well-being of the public, and we can't overlook how that accessibility really impacts everyone that's using the space.
From a personal standpoint, I tend to think data as a raw material that needs to be articulated by design decisions based on like research and analysis of the users, the context, the site. And so it's not to say that one is more important than the other. I think they should both be grounded in human experience. So like a project I've done at school, it's I use this Instagram post to generate holographic forms so that people can experience the real-time data more easily. And I think all of that are all based on design decisions. So I tend to think they are both important.
Thank you.